I think there's no denying that our world is the brink of a massive war. I think more than ever, we are seeing just the corruption, the injustice, and really the fruit of just our wounded hearts coming into fruition into all the different countries, the division that's being caused, I think, by our own accord to some degree. And so I think it's important for women today to be hyperly aware of the war that's happening, I think, externally, but more importantly, the war that's happening spiritually. And you can't look at what's happening in the world right now and not see that there's something greater at play, that the evil that is surrounding us is so palpable. You can touch it, you can feel it. I mean, I feel like those last 3 years, my soul has been awakened to just the reality of humanity, how broken we are and how evil is so real. And in some ways, I've grieved the world I've come to, I think, I've grieved the world I once knew prior to, I think, COVID, because in some ways my eyes or the veil has been pulled, and I'm seeing the corruption in our government, the corruption in our church, the corruption in our institutions, in our business. And you want to believe that there's so much good in this world, but it's been hard to, I think that I've had to mature my own eyes and not feel a sense of negativity or help or hopelessness amidst just seeing the corruption that's happening and the destruction that's happening in our world. And so I think this podcast is really about what's our role as women for such a time of war, a spiritual war, but a human war that I think is brewing around us. I think number one, we have to be vigilant in what's happening. I don't think that we can just sort of turn the other way and pretend that this war is not coming in our doorstep, pretend that the transgender, propaganda towards our children, the erasing of women in the sports, or perhaps sort of dehumanizing motherhood and replacing it with this birthing parent, it's here. I think the propaganda that's happening in our school with pornography, with the idea that now it's not just transgender, but also pedophilia that's being normalized. I remember looking at this 2-3 years ago, and I thought, this can't be real. We can't have a society that actually signs up to this idea of, pedophilia, which is, what do they call it? There's a word that they're calling it. It's a mature attraction and minor attraction. I'm sorry. And as I see kind of the unraveling of what's happening in our world, you can't help but think, wow, I've been asleep under a rock. And at the same time, question, how did we get here? How did our country become so divided? How did America, who was really rooted in, morality and truth, and the founding fathers, who was rooted in faith, become so relativistic, where there's no sense of objective truth, that what is once upon a time common sense is really just sort of this illogical, nonsensical world where it's no longer common practice, and basic understanding of what it means to be human is really gone. I mean, the idea that we can have pornography in our school system, and that adults are signing up and saying and fighting for our children's right to have this pornographic videos or part of our curriculum. I mean, I can't wrap my mind around it, honestly. I can't wrap my mind around why adults are the ones that are perpetuating pornographic videos, or perhaps allowing this to happen through our school system. I can't imagine that we grown women are the ones raising up and saying, sure, women can be in men's sport. I mean, feminism has fought so hard to have freedom and rights for women, only to have that freedom and right for us to actually have our own space already taken away from us. So what's our role in our society? I think number one, we have to see it for what it is. We can't just pretend that it's not happening or it's not coming to us. 3 years ago, I would have told you we have to do our best to raise our children and do our noble work to take care of our homes, our families. I don't think that's enough in time of war. In a time of war, we need everyone on deck, and it's not just kind of a time to put our feet up and take care of our own families. I think there is a different spirit at war, and especially spiritual warfare, when every woman has to be vigilant against the attack around us and attack within us. So number one, being aware of what's happening, having our, paying attention to the news, but not just your, I would say, mainstream news, but also really kind of paying attention to not just what we see it as it is, but rather to do our own homework and question, I think, what's happening in the world. So number one is pay attention to what's happening in the world. Number two, question. I think that we can't just see things and accept things and being like, well, that's the way it is, and therefore that's okay. That's what the pharmaceutical company says. It must be good for us, right? We know now, facts are coming out that the pharmaceutical industry are in cahoots with CDC, and that maybe we were not given, the facts. And so I think that we have to be, I would say, our own advocate and do our own homework for our families and for our children, so that we don't become a victim to, I would say, an agenda to, I'm sorry to say, but to make us unhealthy. Once upon a time, I used to trust what the doctor is saying. And yes, I was sort of vigilant and making sure I did my own homework. But now I'm even more skeptical, because I feel like the pharmaceutical company is in cahoots with our education system, and those that are going through the medical, becoming doctors, are being paid off by a pharmaceutical company, whether they like it or not, or agree with it or not. I mean, it's there, the pharmaceutical company are funding our medical industry, our colleges, our institutions. And I think if we don't see that and we just sort of pretend that it's not happening, then we're not doing our own homework, and we could become a victim, right, to the agenda. So we have to do our part, to do our research, and not just take things for what they are, but do our own research. That's, I think, I would say, one thing I have come to awaken in this past couple of years. I think number three, free speech is under attack, and it's not, it's not conspiracy. I think that the word conspiracy was invented to help us almost doubt or not question truth. I think that we have to learn to speak up. I don't think this is the time to be quiet and to succumb to just saying, well, what can we do about it? Right? What can we do about it? I feel like that idea is sort of a lukewarm idea, or this idea of mediocrity. We can do something about it, even if it means a conversation with a friend, even if it means that we are going to be censored by putting up a question or posting something. I think that we can push back. And if we don't speak up, then who will? If not now, then when? We have to look at history and study history so that history doesn't repeat itself. And I do think that we as women have a role to play, to be vigilant against tyrannical institutions that rob us of our God-given freedom. And it begins with studying the fact that free speech is under attack. And so for us to just succumb to this idea that, well, what can we do about it, I think is a sense of defeat. And it requires us to kind of examine our own ability to fight for truth, because we can't just say, well, what can I do about it? Let me just take care of my family, and I don't really want to watch the news because it's too damaging and it's too confusing. Sure, but we are stronger than that. And if we're not doing that, then guess who is? And the people are continuing to pose tyrannical agendas against our country, against the value of women, against the value of families, against the value of men. And they are winning if we stay silent. Cardinal Burke said, evil grows when good men stay silent. And I really believe that good women out there have been silent. And I don't think we're silent because we want to, but because essentially we don't even know how to speak up. We feel this sense of fear of being canceled, or a sense of, what do we do? Does it even matter for me to speak up? And what I'm encouraging you to say is that if we all do it, then it does matter. If we're saying, if we're questioning, if we're engaging, if we're in conversation, if we're studying, if we're doing our homework and we're speaking up and we're learning how to speak with great, I would say, charity and kindness, but fierceness, then I think that we stand a chance. But to do nothing and to say nothing and pretend that it's not happening is exactly going to be our own defeat. I think at number 4, I think there's an awakening back to what it means to live a moral life. What we're seeing right now is that evil is actually turning upon itself. I think the moral decay in our culture is causing the division, the heartache, the frustration, and what you're seeing it in our, I would say, school system, where children are literally enraged and is capable of taking a gun against each other. Or I saw that, video that went viral of a transgender boy who just from behind, such coward work of pulling a girl and really attacking her from behind. And this poor girl in middle school was hyperventilating, trying to breathe. I mean, this is what's happening. The rage, the propaganda, the division that's weakening our country and our culture is happening on a daily basis because we've been silent. And I say this to you because I believe I've been silent for years. I feel like I didn't want to get into the controversy. Who wants to be, in the forefront of this, where you're susceptible to being criticized, being judged, being manipulated? It is exhausting. But the alternative is to give up. The alternative is to say, here's my country, here's my freedom to be a woman, here's my family, run with it and do it as you can. Now, I know that sounds extreme, but it's essentially what we're doing when we say nothing. Right? Let me just give you an example. I think I was speaking to a family, and they are aware that Disney right now is promoting, this I would say this TV show where this woman gets impregnated by a demon, by Satan himself. And I remember having this conversation, and she said, well, that's just, some things are good and some things are not. I really love Disney because it was nostalgic for me, so I'm not going to take a stand against it. It's really not a big deal. Well, what if we all do that and say it's really not a big deal? I'm not going to say take a stand on it, and it's just nostalgic. So I won't stand for what I think is morally, what is immoral. This is why Disney is able to actually just go rampant and attack the family, attack the woman, and create, I would say, movies that are against, that are just evil. Because we're tolerating it. Is it hard for me to say, we got to get rid of that, Disney, and we have to get rid of Netflix, and my children, when they talk to me, we have to get rid of everything. They're all part of it. I'm like, yeah, it is. And we have to discern and think about, what are we standing up against and what are we fighting for? And I think that as mothers, we are at war. We have a spiritual warfare that's happening. And so there is an obligation for us to bring in our children with discernment to say, what can we share with them with deeper awareness so that they know what's happening in our world? I've started to show my children just what's happening behind the scenes in Disney and Hollywood, and really seeing what's happening even in our music industry, of the satanic rituals that are happening in our music industry. Now, the work that I do in the women's school is what we call human formation, which means we form the woman to become the woman that she was created to be, through layers and layers of discipline, through mindset formation, and the formation of our, I would say, skill set, which is really just kind of virtues breaking down to small bite-sized pieces. So in some ways, I feel like, I don't really need to get into that war, because it's really about forming the human person, developing themselves so they can achieve their God-given potential. But the reality is that we don't form ourselves for the sake of forming ourselves. We form ourselves for the sake of fighting the battle against evil. And that's the invitation that I think here, for such a time as this, we have to see things for what they are and say, what is the call of women today? And I think this is where I think that there needs to be a new kind of woman that's rising from these ashes. And this woman is somebody who understands that she is responsible for rebuilding culture, that she is responsible for who she is becoming, so that she can create an invitation to those around her. She said she takes responsibility in fighting the immorality that's happening in the world, the evil in our world. And I think that requires somebody who is humble enough to know, what's my role, humble enough to know that we haven't arrived, that we have training that needs to happen day in and day out, that we need to have, I would say, the awareness that we need to become students of our culture, students of the world, of people, and most especially students of ourselves. What is lacking in our own mind, in our own heart, in our own skill set that's inhibiting us from fighting the battles outside of us? We need to fight the battles interiorly so that we can actually have greater capacity to fight the battles exteriorly. And what I am seeing right now is America is the last frontier. If we no longer have freedom in America, then where will the human heart go to achieve our God-given freedom? What I think is so profound here is that America was given, I would say, God-given freedom. What I mean by that is that I think God desires for humanity to have the freedom to become fully who they were created to be. But with that freedom also comes responsibility, the freedom to do what is bad, the freedom to do what is good. I think that what we have in America is the freedom to become all that we can be. And what we did, I would say, is that squander that freedom. Now it's freedom to do whatever we want without consequence. And I think we're seeing the consequence of a woman, of a man who's just incapable, I think, of interior discipline, and is living a life of immorality because they can do whatever they want, whenever they want, with whoever they want, with whenever they want, without a sense of consequence. But the greatest consequence, I think, is their life of unfulfillment. And you're seeing in the eyes of men and women who are unfulfilled with the life they're living, because it is a prison. Because ultimately, we can't do whatever we want and feel the freedom that I think we deeply desire. And it's not this freedom that is available just in the Western world of having freedom, because having freedom is different from being free, right? And I think the idea of freedom that we are fighting for is really about this interior freedom, the freedom to become who I was created to be. And in America, I believe that we are given that God-given freedom, the external freedom that our forefathers gave us, that so many gave their lives for, so that we can achieve that interior freedom, the freedom to become who God created us to be. And I think that we need to start taking responsibility for the freedom that we've been given to defend our nation, to defend our family, to defend our women, to defend our men, to defend our children from such immorality. And that requires us to be vigilant, to pay attention to what's happening in the world, and to train harder than we've ever trained before, so we have the stamina to fight the spiritual warfare. And I just want to say too that we have weakened the woman so much that women today are in this sort of emotional roller coaster, incapable of becoming a pillar to society. And I think that was, I would say, I think there was a real cynical agenda to dehumanize women to a point that she's weakened herself so much, is incapable of actually having a resilient mindset and emotionally in command of who we are, that we're incapable of fighting the battle. We're just trying to survive day in and day out, that we are so distracted. Our mind is a victim of all the external circumstance, that we no longer have that strength to say, you know what, it doesn't matter what's happening in the world around us. My peace is unshakable. The truth is that that's what we all deeply desire. I don't think anybody wants to sign up for a chaotic, unpeaceful, stressful life. But what is required of a woman to be peaceful is interior discipline, to learn the skill of managing our mind and being emotionally in command, to have the maturity and to actually have delayed gratification, to say no to ourselves, to have layers and layers and layers of discipline and responsibility in becoming who we ought to be for humanity, so that we can then actually rebuild culture. Because right now, the battle is here. Our culture has succumbed to tyranny, to evil. And I think if we don't fight this now, then what will become of our country? That my children's freedom is no longer guaranteed. So I think this is the time for women to armor up. I think there's a new movement that's happening, and it's the rise of a new woman. And that we are aware that we are at war with something that is beyond just material. Yes, there is a physical war, but it is a fruit of a spiritual war that is beyond this world. And so, I think we have to armor up together. I think the division in our own hearts from not knowing our value needs to be eradicated, and do our own interior work so we can actually be united and not be in comparison and competition, because we need our voices united as women, because we are being erased every single day. through institutions and companies and the government. I mean, just the idea of a birthing parent really rattles me. This idea of the CDC changing it to chest feeding. So we have to link arms. We have to armor up together. And I think that we have to pray harder than we've ever prayed before, because in a time of war, there are casualties. And it's not, maybe there's physical casualties in the world, but there's spiritual casualties. And if you think about it, how many women today are alive but are walking dead? There's no life in their heart. They're incapable of seeing what is true, good, and beautiful. They have been so robbed of their own humanity and their own self-worth that they can't even see the life of a child as something so valuable, or the sacredness of childhood to be revered, that they're capable of promoting pornography itself in a very, innocent, in the face of innocent children. That we have drag queens and we think this is okay. We have mothers that bring their children to drag shows in their school system, and we have no eyes to resist and say, no, this is not okay. We have to fight together. We have to go back into the basic of what does it mean to live a life of moral values? What does it mean to have a sense of moral compass and truth? What does it mean to respect myself as a woman? What does it mean to bring reverence to the sacredness of what it means to be a woman? What does it mean for me as a woman to honor the value of men? What does it mean for me to rise up and protect my own country from the injustice that's happening? What do I need to do in my local government and my institutions and where I work and as a nurse or as a teacher, and to speak up against it? And this is what I think is a call for women today, is to armor up for a time of war, because we are at war. And in some ways, when there is war, this is where we refine women. This is where we redeem ourselves, because when darkness abounds, grace abounds more. When it's so dark, our light, when it's so dark outside, this is when our light can truly shine as women. And so what do? We begin with our own interior work. We begin with knowing that our value is not replaceable, that we have a God-given worth that is worthy of fighting, that we need to stand for the value of what it means to be a man and a woman, that we have to resist the erasing of our own sexuality, that we have to fight for freedom, our country, and that we have to do our part to rebuild our culture and fight the spiritual warfare for the sake of our children and for the sake of our own interior freedom. So wherever you are in this world, I invite you to join the movement in the Women's School to learn how to be a woman in a world that is trying to erase us. I invite you to join us in a free course that we are offering. It's all for free. It's called How to Be a Woman. You can go to howtobeawomanfreecourse.com. We will set you up with a coach, with a group of women, with a course that you walk through for a whole month, where you go and show up with your group once a week for 1 hour, and you rediscover your value as a woman and your unique and irreplaceable purpose for such a time as this. This course is entirely free because we believe that it is time to wake up the hearts of women. And I truly believe that it is a privileged time to be a woman for such a time as this. We need a new kind of woman that's going to rise from these ashes and lead the charge in rebuilding our culture. So I implore you and I invite you to defend the value of women for generations to come, to defend our country and do our own work so that we can then have the capacity to fight the spiritual warfare around us.